A big hello to everyone. My name is Abhishek Kushik Philip. I'm a senior speech therapist working at PlayStreet.
And I'm Sarah Abraham, and I'm also a speech therapist working at PlayStreet.
PlayStreet is an organization that provides educational services to help the children with special needs become independent and live up to his or her potential. We offer parent empowerment programs and integrated schooling programs and a variety of clinical services. In recognition of Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, we would like to center our discussions around augmentative and alternative communication. Our goal is to emphasize the significance of AAC, address the challenges associated with it, and promote greater awareness of this essential aspect of autism advocacy.
Today, in our talk, we have the lovely Laura Hayes, and she is also a speech therapist with over 14 years of experience with augmentative communication in both school and as well as medical settings. She's presented across state, national, and international conferences, and she's published and supported both inpatient, pediatric, and educational augmentative and alternative research. She's currently working as an AAC specialist for a large metropolitan school district, and she loves to provide training, implementation resources, and guiding direction to help with the success of using AAC. She has authored independent coursework for AAC and Gestalt language processing and provides consultation services for AAC. So thank you so much, Laura, for taking time and just coming on with us to just share your insight and your information. We are so honored to have you here with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Without further ado, let's get into the questions. Laura, I would like to know how you used AAC when you started, like, after your graduation maybe, and how do you use it now?
That's a great question because a lot has changed. A lot has changed with what we know about AAC, and a lot has changed with the devices and the hardware itself. So I won't give away my exact age, but when I went to college, all of the equipment was different. I had one short class on AAC over the summer, and we went to our assistive tech. We were lucky in the sense that we had our assistive technology state loaner closet in our city. So we went there and we had an on-site lab where we could explore the switches and the equipment, but that was pretty much it. We talked about some of the philosophies at the time, and I remember walking away from the class going, I am never going to do AAC. There's just no way. It's not my thing. I'm just not going to do it. And so never say never, because then once I started working in a pediatric hospital and I started doing a lot of work with autistic children, I realized that a large majority had complex communication needs, and they were going to need AAC, or augmentative and alternative communication. So I started doing all the things that now I know are not best practice. I started working on, identifying colors and answering WH questions, and, this idea that you had to prove that you needed AAC or robust language. The main devices that I wasn't working with like the Liberators or some of the really big computerized devices, but I did work with what we call now the paperweights or the door stops, because they were about 5 to 7 pounds. I worked with the Maestro and the VMAX and the V and the Vantage lights and all of those things when they were out. So just in that sense, things have definitely shifted from when I first started, both in implementation strategies and how we use devices, as well as the hardware.
Wow, that's a long way.
We've come a long way. I've come a long way. Like, technology has come a long way.
Absolutely.
Definitely we can see that changes.
And I think it's truly right, like what you said, and how, and I think we all are at fault at some point. It's not because we didn't know better than that we would start working on all of these concrete things that we thought a child needs to know right before they go into AACs, and even all devices were made in a particular way. So Laura, if I wanted to just go on with asking you a few things, what would you say are some AAC devices right now, if you're looking back the way you've come, especially because you've had long years of working with this, some devices that you seem to see that are coming out, it's not going to really be any more effective, it's not going to be any use to our children anymore. What would you say are some of those devices that are becoming less popular right now?
I think it really goes back to 2011, and 2011 is the birth, as most of us in the assistive technology world know, is the birth of the iPad. And so that changed the game for everyone. I very clearly remember the AAC companies at the time really pushing back, saying, we are not going to go on, we're not going to make an app, we're not going to go mainstream. We have a dedicated source, and that is what our AAC users need. And as technology grows and as things become more mainstream and inclusive, then we have to make them accessible to the masses. And so that started to happen. And slowly all of the major AAC companies and some just startup companies started making these accessible AAC apps and products that could be used by everyone. And that shift started to happen where everyone had an iPad. So it felt more inclusive and it felt natural to have these in all of our environments. And then the accessibility got better, right? So as things become more inclusive and more available to the masses, then it's not this specialized equipment that we have to have gatekept behind insurance and Medicaid funding and all of these different roadblocks that you might see. So then the price point gets lower and everything kind of shifts. And so that's been something that's been amazing to see through the years, is just how things become more accessible. Even when we think about the future and how some of our AAC systems and apps are not available on mobile platforms yet, I see that coming. I absolutely see that coming, because people want something that is mobile, especially as they get older. That is something that I'm looking for a lot of my AAC users. They start off with something maybe a little bit larger, and then slowly over time, maybe it shifts down to a mini size or just something smaller, and then they want something mobile. So having that affordability for them, I think, is huge. I also think that when we look at alternative access, that has shifted. We had Switch users that had to have a dedicated device, right? And then slowly iOS and Android has made Switch accessibility part of their integrative features, even eye gaze, so I see all of that coming. I know AI is something that's been big in the last couple of years, and thinking about how could that shift and be supportive within word prediction, right? And text prediction and all of these things. How can we just make it so that it's still authentic to what the individual wants to say, right? Or we don't want it to shift to something that's not honoring them and their individual thought and voice. But I see that coming.
Great. So at this moment, artificial intelligence is something that is quite popular across the world. So are there any changes already happening in AAC with relation to artificial intelligence?
So yes. So if you follow, a really great podcast to follow in the world of AAC is Talking with Tech. And so Chris and Rachel just had an episode where they highlighted the ATIA conference that happens every year in Orlando. And so one of the big topics was AI, and I think ChatPC is the one that he referenced. But thinking about that and thinking about, I don't think we're there yet as far as how it can impact our AAC users. And I also think, listening to their voices and truly, is it something that they would find beneficial, right? Is it something that they could see working for them? And I think that so far what they were talking about on that podcast is that it's mixed, because they all have individual needs and ideas about what that would offer them. So and I guess maybe mentioning, so in the world of AI, it's the option of a computer interface offering suggestions. So it might look like you asking a question to your AI source and saying, what is AAC? And the computer interface would then spit back a very long, specific, well thought out response of exactly what that is. So then the idea would be, if we did that for someone who is using AAC and they wanted to generate a conversation, let's say, about a preferred topic like trains, then they might say, like, I want to talk about trains or something to that effect, like, give me 5 things about trains. And it could generate that. And would that be beneficial for communication and conversational exchange?
Okay.
And yeah.
All right. So I think we can. It's quite clear that we are still in the early phase of AI and AAC. So I have another question now. So apart from the well-known strategies like aided language stimulation or modeling, what are the other strategies that are evidence-based which we can use to help the children learn AAC?
So I think when we go back to thinking about language strategies and communication strategies that would be helpful for AAC, we really have to go back to the heart of what AAC is. And so AAC at the core is expressive language. And so how we're expressing ourselves with different people across time in different contexts. So when we think of strategies that are going to support that, your expressive language strategies that are going to support someone in communication are going to be the same strategies you want to use using AAC. The big thing there is that it's expressive language. So I think some of the trap that we can fall into is, I call it green, right? When we're green to AAC and we're new, is that it's easier for us to highlight receptive things or find and that's not really giving them that expressive language toolkit. So it also, I think, depends on what type of language processing style you have, right? So another big topic in the field right now is analytic and Gestalt language processing. Yep. And so it's near and dear to my heart because it's something that I worked with so many autistic children from the very beginning and I still to this day, like, have a huge spot in my heart working with that population. And I think that it was one of those things where I knew they were learning differently. And I felt like I was teaching them these strategies that I knew from grad school and from best practice. I was doing recasting. So I was rephrasing what they said, and I was using extension or trying to add on words to what they were saying. I was using aided language input. I was prompting them, right? And so, but it wasn't working, or it would only work in that context and they weren't able to carry it over. So I was so frustrated with the fact that these individuals weren't making the progress that I was seeing with some of my other populations. And so then when I started learning about Gestalt language processing, it just made sense logically that this is how they learn. Yep. So if the audience isn't familiar with it, analytic language processing is what you might see at a pediatrician's office, right? It's word babies where they're referencing things in their environment. They start to babble, then they'll use single words, then they start to combine those words, and then that leads to grammar and to sentences. But someone who is a Gestalt language processor is actually learning based off intonation and chunks. So they're going to have more of a top-down approach where they're going to have episodes and experiences, and they might use words or phrases that are around those experiences. And so it's a different style of language processing, which means that it needs different language strategies to support it. And so for those children, or for those learners, I won't even say children, because we know now too that there are autistic adults that process this way, that maybe have been treated as an analytic language processor, that need these other strategies. So all children are going to benefit from aided language stimulation, like you said. That is a golden, go back to your bread and butter. That's the gold standard. So always start there. And when we do aided language stimulation, we want to differentiate it from modeling, because modeling is in and of itself has the expectation that I say something and then you say something. I model it for you, but there's this expectation to then you say it. Whereas aided language stimulation or aided language input is really giving the input. It's an input strategy where we are just modeling without expectations. There's no requirements that you say anything back. I'm just giving you input. And we know that that's how language is learned naturally. And so that is so important that sometimes explicit instruction is really beneficial in setting up scenarios where we do have some keywords that we want to really support them with. And so for an analytic language processor, that might look like core vocabulary and modeling words that we see across all activities, words like go, like, stop, want. For someone who is a Gestalt language processor, it really kind of depends on where you find that they are at. So if they're in, we'll say stage 1, I know you guys are doing, with Katya, you guys are doing another presentation, and that will be a great one. So if people want to dive further into GLP, they can. But if someone's in early stages of Gestalt language processing, they actually need more gestalts. So they need more phrases. So we need to be modeling those phrases, and whether that be through multiple icons on a device or whether that be through a single icon on a device, it's really important that we model in the way they're learning and they're processing language. And so specifically, if we're going to prompt and we're asking for responses, we want to give really rich data language input first. Those input strategies are key, right? Another great input strategy is going to be to reference in our environment or to reference what we see the child doing. So if they're playing with trains, right, I'm going to be modeling about trains. I'm not going to be modeling about a book, right? I'm going to engage with their child-led play, model what I see them doing, reference it, and then based off of their processing style, that will lead me to say, am I going to be modeling words and have that word approach, or am I going to be modeling gestalts or mitigated gestalts to help them break it down from the top down? So bottom up, analytic language processing strategies, top down, gestalt language processing strategies. And so that's going to kind of guide what other supports I might be implementing. So many strategies, use expressive language strategies, and then kind of to figure out what type of language learner they are.
Okay.
Yeah,
that was good.
Yeah. And I think I know and it's something that's really on that I think all speech therapists need to know. And I think even in India, we're still just coming to know about Gestalt processing, and we're learning about it. So that's something very important that needs to be highlighted. And yes, we are definitely diving into that. So for all our viewers, we are getting back into that topic into the next few recordings too. So Laura,
I think, Sarah, we also need to highlight that she has a course in Meaningful Speech website.
Yes.
She has offering a course. I think we should let the viewers also know.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, Laura, you're the one who does it. You're the one who is the presenter for the course, right?
So I am one of the presenters. I guess you would call it the primary presenter. And then Alex Zakos, who also has her own course there. And then we also have other AAC experts and specialists that are highlighted on our bonus modules. I will tell you guys first, we have some new, hopefully soon to be coming bonus modules for some of the other AAC apps that haven't yet been on there. So it's one of those courses that's ever evolving, because we know AAC is always evolving. So that's exciting.
So absolutely. I think, and we are very excited about it. And I mean, I'm sure for you, even coming along this way, I'm sure you've had your fair share of bumps in the road, where it's been hard, where you've thought about, okay, this can't happen, it can't move forward. Can you tell us some of those practical things that you've seen with the device, or those technical difficulties that you've seen? What are some of them that you've faced over the years?
So I'll start with the technical, because in all honesty, the technical difficulties I think are easier to talk about than some of the maybe practical difficulties you might see when it comes to having AAC success. Technical difficulties, the biggest support or resource I can guide people to is the participation model by Buchelman and Miranda. And that talks about kind of a branching of where you might run into some roadblocks. And so the technical side is, of course, the equipment itself, right? When things don't work, or there are growing pains, like when a company shifts. I will never forget when Tobii Dynavox merged, and then they kind of shifted hardware, and so many of my alternative access users, my Switch users, really struggled with the new software interface because it was completely different. And then they also were learning a new software at the same time because it was a different language software. So things like that make it really difficult. And I think companies in general do a pretty good job, but it's something to keep in mind is those legacy users of making sure that when you shift, you're bringing them along with you and that they're not having to relearn or getting left behind in that process. Same thing when we're shifting to like an iPad down to a mobile device, we want the software to feel the same. We want the backups to come with us so that we're moving forward and there's not a lot of relearning going on. So I think, you know, that technical side of if the device malfunctions, or if we're working through, okay, well, we decided to go to the beach this summer, but there's a huge glare off of the sand, and how can we use our eye gaze system? Those are technical things that we can help walk a family through, or that we can guide them to technical support for the company, because the major companies do offer technical support with their software and hardware. So those kinds of things can be roadblocks, but they're usually short-term roadblocks, or ones that we have options to kind of break down. The practical roadblocks, or the other side of those barriers from the participation model, really look at how the environment is set up and what the communication partner's beliefs are, right? I just did a post on Instagram, and we're kind of diving into mindset or attitude barriers that we might see.
Yeah.
Things like not presuming potential, or thinking that we have to have a certain number of words before moving on. A big one that I see a lot is the child is stimming or is distracted, and they're not using communication appropriately. So it's not going to work for them. And so those types of barriers can be so hard to break down, because it's not about the AAC user. It's about everybody else and their mindset and the opportunities that the child is given. You know, I always use this strategy. I was working one time, and I went into a classroom and I watched the dynamics, and I watched my AAC users. Now I had about half and half, right? I had some students that they're using spoken words, and about half that were using AAC. And the number of opportunities that the children that were using spoken words had was 8-1, 8-1. And my heart sank, because I said, oh, we need to be doing better, because not only do they need more time, not only do they have a harder time generating that flexible language, but now they're not getting as many opportunities. And so that feedback, that natural occurrence, all that natural language learning that occurs when you use words, you don't have as many chances. So I think those ideas, or even let's jump over to policy barriers, right? I hear all the time, I have an amazing support system where I work, and it sounds like you guys really do too. But if you have a policy like, well, we use PECs here, or we have to use light tech before they have to show us they can use language before we move to voice output. Those policy barriers are, we only use this one system. Well, if that system doesn't have switch access and we have a switch user, well, then what do? Well, they're just going to use 2 cells, and because that's what they can access with their hands. Well, that's not affording them a true feature match of what they really need in a system. So those kinds of policies can be really detrimental to the AAC process, or to the people trying to support it and move things forward.
Okay, so I have something to ask you similar to what you have said. So about barriers. So we have also faced something very similar in India also, especially acceptance is one big factor here. So I want to ask you how the family acceptance has changed over time from your audio career. What have you seen?
So just like the birth of the iPad, it changed the hardware of technology and what we do and what we offer in assistive technology. I think it also shifted the mindsets of families and having access to that information. So it wasn't just me coming in as an expert saying, I promise this is going to support language and AAC does not inhibit speech. You know, the research tells us that. It's not me sitting back. It's them seeing that with their own eyes, seeing other kids with iPads, seeing peer engagement when a child comes in with AAC and they can communicate in the classroom and their peers really accept it. I think those things are so powerful for family involvement and family acknowledgement, having information on social media, right? And being able to digest that in small chunks is so huge for families who have a lot going on, who don't have the time to go to all these classes and learn everything. Having it readily available, that information is key to the success. That's what I've seen. I still see, and I'm sure you guys do too, where there's a mindset of, I just don't know, I'm not sure, I don't know if I'm ready to start this journey, or I still see it like, we don't want it at home, like we know what they mean, you know, just keep it there and use it there. But in general, I think that the level of acceptance is not what it was. I think that we're definitely making strides of it being part of mainstream technology and the information being there for them to learn and to grow and to accept as they move forward.
But how is it now? Do you see a shift of change, like from you have started? Do you think that the parents are accepting more?
I do. I really do. I think that I felt like I used to have to give packets of information out, and I said, well, really just let us try it. Let's try it for 4 weeks. Let's try it in a clinic setting and see what they do. And, you know, we would kind of pull them along, but that's hard, right? 4 weeks of learning a new language you're going to see some small changes, and you're going to see maybe some body or receptive changes or some pre-symbolic changes in how they're listening and learning, but you're not necessarily going to see them take off. Sometimes you do, but not necessarily going to see them take off and start building a bunch of sentences and using the device fluidly. So that buy-in is so crucial, right? It's like anything, you know, the first 4 weeks, sometimes even the first 4 minutes are huge of what their response is going to be. And so now I feel like I can give them that information and plant the seed, if you will, and say, also, why don't you check out these 2 resources? Just go check it out when you have some time. It's available for them to digest when they're ready. And then we can come back to it, right? I can ask some coaching questions and say, so what was the thing that hit you the most when you went to that resource I shared, whether it's Practical AAC, the website, or the company website itself, right? Or just an Instagram, like a Facebook group, you know, go to this parent Facebook group, because then it's not me, the expert, saying it, right? Then it's your peers who you can empathize with and who really understand your perspective, right? Because I'm not a parent to an autistic child. I have a sister with a disability, so I may understand it more than some, but until you're a parent that is trying to juggle medical needs and sensory needs, and you have other children, like, you're living the life, like adding a piece of equipment, you know, whatever that equipment is, can be really difficult. So I think I've seen a huge shift in their ability to understand and accept it. I still think we have a ways to go, but I do see that shift.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I mean, we are hoping that it comes in. We still deal with a lot more of acceptance, you know, getting them to go there, but we are making a lot of change, and we're seeing that once parents start understanding it. So on those same terms, like you said, like before, it was you had to give in a lot of information. You had to sit down with them, explain it to them, and things like that. What are some things that you always tell your parents, especially when you introduce? Like you said, some children pick it up really quick, some of the, and you know, I think a lot of parents don't understand that it is like learning a new language. So they think as soon as you give them the iPad or you give them the tab, they're supposed to go on going on making sentences, and they really don't understand that, you know, it takes time to build that. So what are some tips that when you introduce it for the first time, what do you tell the parents? What are some things that you generally advise them on?
Well, there's a couple of things that I like to do. So the first is I do like to give a few. The key is a few, right? Some teams will overload them with, here's all the information and all the links and all the resources, and leave it kind of as a standard. I found that over the years, that's too much information, right? People see it and they just say, oh, okay, I'll get to that when I have some time. And then they don't have the time. So I tend to give a few resources or a few links to what is AAC, how do we use AAC at home? Or I might give an account of a family who does a really good job of modeling AAC. Again, depending upon which type of learner they might be, analytic or Gestalt. And then what I like to do is I like to sit down with them and I say, let's go over your day. Tell me about your day. And let's kind of highlight it and almost do an environmental inventory. And then we really look at it and I kind of do some side-by-side coaching and say, okay, so you're telling me that you guys always do mealtime, or you always have a book you read before bed. What are some things that you might say in that in that time? Like, do they have to ask for more, or are manners really important, or do you do prayers or something along that line? And that leads them. I try to lead them. I try not to have that expert model. That was something that's shifted too, is I used to come in and say, okay, this is exactly how it goes. And now I really try to be more of a peer and a mentor and a coach, because it builds so much more capacity. And so when we sit down and do that, we highlight either things they say a lot or things they would want their child to say. And we start there. So we say, okay, you've given me a lot of things you do. So we're going to start with 1 to 2 activities that you feel like you could really use the device and it's a good time. It's not chaotic. You're not running out the door. Yeah. And so then we start there. I show them where those words or phrases are on the device, or if they need to be customized, we add them to the device. And then we come back to that. We say, okay, so how's that going in that one activity, and what might we shift? So those are probably my first steps with the family. Some of my families want to go gung-ho. They want all the information. And I do try to feel that out in my first few sessions with them, is I might highlight, okay, here's this, or here's all of it. You can dive in and get to all of it. I have families reach out on Instagram sometimes and say, like, I just want more. So resources are just like our children learning the language. Resources need to be paced for the communication partner. And sometimes that pacing can be really slow, but you have to build the success with where they're at. So if they're not even bought in, like, you got to start real small. And so then that might lead me to, well, I see him doing these things in my session. I would love for you to join me in my session, and I'm just going to hang out over here. And so they can see that success and have that social interaction with them. So again, there's that buy-in piece.
I think what you said is completely true. Yeah.
Go ahead, Abhishek. Yeah.
So, like, empowering parents is a big factor in this, and helping them to provide the resources according to what they can understand and comprehend. It's a big thing we can actually do. So we have seen device abandonment, like in a session also, when we try something, for some reason they are still, take a step back. No, we don't want to try. And what are the reasons behind of this device abandonment, and what are the ways we can solve it?
So I'm going to go back to that participation model, right? Because those are the threats and the barriers we might see to device abandonment. I'm going to ask a lot of questions and say, is it about opportunities, right? Has the child not had the same number of opportunities? Even with modeling, to get the same number of opportunities with AAC as spoken words, we know that we need at least 200 opportunities a day where the device is being modeled. If we're not hitting that, and I always tell people, it doesn't mean 200 different words. Doesn't mean that. It just means 200. They need to hear those words on the device, and they need to hear different contexts of those words being used at least 200 times. And so if we're not hitting that, then they're not getting the same opportunities. And so maybe that's where we need to beef it up. If again, it's the attitude and the mindset of, I know what they want, like, I just give them their food and like we move throughout our day because there's just not enough time to work on the device. Well, then that's where we need to kind of start our coaching process and say, okay, so that's not a good time for you. You feel like you already know it. Or maybe if you do feel like it's a good time, but you just know what they mean, maybe then I highlight that and we try to duplicate that in our sessions, in our clinic sessions, and then pull you in and say, look how much stronger it is. Or let's look at how you thought they wanted some more crackers, but actually, like, when we started talking about like different colors, they were really interested in colors, and look how much more dynamic their language is. I always compare it to my own kids, and you think you know what they want, and then they go off into right field and they start talking about something totally different, and that's okay. And I think that when we really look at device abandonment, it comes with the idea on some level. It may not be a conscious level. It's too much. It's too hard to do one more thing, or it's not going to benefit them. And they can't, AAC is a marathon process. And so when we really dive into the I can see the future. You guys can see the future. You know the power of it and what can come from it. But the communication partners with device abandonment are not seeing that. So it really comes back to strategies to how to help them see it so that that AAC user can be successful. It's very rarely about the AAC user. And again, when it is, it's usually related to access or not having enough opportunities to see language. So I did a collaborative post with Rachel Madel a while back, and AAC for Me, we did another one all about stimming, because I think there's these misnomers around early emergent AAC use and what it's supposed to look like, right? We think that early AAC use is having a few words that we use appropriately. That's not communication. Communication and early emergent communication is messy. If you look at toddlers, my toddler, she is 2 and her communication is messy, and that is how it should be. We shouldn't be expecting them to say a word or a letter or a color appropriately. That's not language. That's some of us call that compliance, right? Like, you said it, good job. Like, now we can move on. Authentic communication is all over the place, right? It's saying what I want to say when I want to say it. So if I want to talk, or if I like the sound of how bird sounds when I say it, or animal sounds, God love TouchChat for adding those animal sounds on one of their topics pages, I'm gonna explore that. And I'm gonna learn that over time. And my job as a communication partner is to give feedback of what that word or sound or phrase means in context. So are we talking about a bird? Oh, we did see some birds this morning, but like right now we're eating our lunch. So maybe we can make a bird out of our food, right? Like, I'm gonna give that context to them so that they can really learn what language means, because it's not meant to be you say this and then, yes, good job, right? That's not language. That's compliance and learning in a different explicit way. But language is implicit. Communication is implicit, where we're just embedding it throughout all of our day.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important that I think not just parents, but also professionals also understand that, because we all go into that zone of, oh, he's understood that, or okay, he knows this. So, okay, that's what it is. Let's move on to the next thing. But it's not really about, to focus more on getting more language concepts in, but you're not really focusing on the communication, and we miss out on that. Yeah, that's very important, like you said. Abhishek.
Well, and Sarah, here's the other thing with that. When we look at language, how many of us would love to see an AAC user just initiate something? It doesn't matter what it is, right? We just want them to initiate. I don't want to have to prompt everything. Yeah. So much more is learned when they're initiating. So I always tell, especially my SLPs who are historically type A, I always tell them it's not about the quantity. Like, you have your data sheet and you want to get 5 to 10 opportunities in. I want 1. I want 1 to 2 where they're really initiating, and I'm like, oh yeah, let's go down this road, because quality is so much more important over quantity when it comes to AAC.
Okay. So, like, we know that AAC doesn't stand alone in the speech therapy sessions. So we also need to encourage and empower our team members also to use it. How do you train them, or how do you support that?
So, yeah, I think this is huge, because when we think about, I'm not sure in India what your school days are like. So correct me if they're very different from the US, but here children are in school 37 to 40 hours a week, the majority of the time. Is it different there?
Around 8 hours, 7 to 8 normal schools. Yeah, that's
in a day or a week.
No, altogether, yeah. So 5 days a week.
Yeah.
5 days
so
a week,
it's about the same then. So in here, what we find is that that's a huge chunk of their learning day. They're in school more than they're at home. And so I really, focus on how can we carry that over and have a team mindset. And so what can that look like? And so how can we get everybody on board? So sometimes that's talking to the OT or the music therapist of, well, let's embed it in your sessions. What does that look like? And It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And so often I think that with AAC, it feels like it's all or nothing. And so it's even with them, it's starting small. Okay, well, what word do you say a lot in your session? One that I find comes up a lot is commenting, and like, because they're trying to get them to do a lot of things, it's like, well, I say awesome or good job a lot. So that's one that I try to get everybody on board with, knowing exactly where it is on the device, because that can be a hook to, oh, okay, like I can do that. That's pretty simple. And I say it a lot. So then we're getting closer to those 200 opportunities. And then the other piece of this is how that shift of understanding how language is organized on a device. Because if you give a device to ABA or PT or OT in music, and they don't have a knowledge of language organization, what do? They oftentimes want to create a page all related to OT or PT. And not that that is bad per se. And some systems are set up with a topic-based organization, or we call it schematic or environmental-based organization, like SNAP, right? But can we also work on core vocabulary, or can we work on some social engagement or strategic use of the device, right? Like, I have something to say, or let me tell you what I did today, something like that, where we're practicing that carryover. So that's going to be individually based, and that's going to be a team decision. So if you can, one of the things we try to do in our schools is try to have team meetings, and they can be real short, right? Just once a week, because again, there's a lot going on. It's not just, as much as I prioritize communication, it's not just communication. There's other things and other pieces of information that are important. But if we can highlight that for all of our students and say, what is our one goal that everybody can focus on this week? That carryover is way more likely, and that device abandonment is way less, and the device isn't going to be put in the backpack, dead when it's time to come to speech therapy, because everybody's bought in. So whether it be focusing on one word everybody can use, or we've sat down and said, okay, in OT, like, you guys are really working on cutting this week, so let me show you where cut is on the device, or like a comment about what they cut, right? Something along those lines, depending upon what the language goals are for the individual.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I definitely agree where it's not easy, but I think if we break it down for them also into a way that they can do it, I think it goes a long way. Just in terms of that, just shooting this out there, you were talking about, how they make separate folders, like, how the PTs can make a separate folder and all. So how would you go about it, especially if children have motor planning issues and things like that? What would be, how would you say, how would you want them to kind of create it in such a way that they can go back, check out core words, or how would you go about doing that generally?
So I think it really depends on the system that they're on, right? Because some systems, so not to dive too much into the weeds, but systems are set up differently, right? Some are set up with a heavy emphasis on motor planning. So any of your semantic compaction systems like Lamports for Life or Unity are going to have a heavy motor planning component. So those systems, we might talk about it differently and say, well, we can have a few words here on the page you created, but a lot of the words you're using are under the kick or the foot because it's motor, right? So maybe we could just target those words instead, because I can also target those words in speech when we do, when we go to the motor room or when we go out to recess, versus something like SNAP, where it is based off of the environment. And then I might be helping them and coaching them and doing some side-by-sides with the OT and PT of saying, we can do your own page because that's how the language is set up. But when we do that page, let's have some questions. Let's have some ways for them to direct the activity. Let's have them have some comments here, so that we're not going completely rogue and we're outside of the schematics of the organization itself, right? We want to really, if we're customizing, and this goes back to any customization, we want to work within the framework. When you take away the framework, you've lost that predictability. And so that's where it comes in really handy to have an AAC specialist or an SLP that knows it, so that we're not going rogue. Because that's something I do see a lot, particularly with my colleagues who are BCBAs or ABAs, right? So we do a lot of strategic planning around, okay, I know you really want to work on categorization. Let me show you how categorization works in this language system so that we're all on the same page and we're going with the grain, flowing the river downstream and not working against it and having to redo it down the road.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And I think that's a long way to go, I think, but I think it's definitely a journey we keep taking. So Laura, just to bring, I know we spoke about a lot of things today, and I think even as we kind of wind down and we're wrapping this talk up, where do you see this going? Like, what do you look into the future? And, what is something that you really want to put out there for our viewers, something that's really on your heart that you would love to share with all of them?
Well, so the two hot topics for sure, AI and artificial intelligence, and then Gestalt language processing, I think are going to make big waves in the field and have a lot of potential for future implications for growth in the world of AAC. AI, because it helps with that strategic piece of timing, and does it take away some of the difficulty with timing and really giving complete thought to other individuals, which we know then shifts their mindset and additional opportunities and all of those things. It's a trickle down effect. So I see that kind of playing into it. Gestalt language processing has been near and dear to my heart, because the children that I'm working with that I used to feel so frustrated with, because I was feeling like I was doing, I just felt it in my heart. Like I was like, this is not right. I should be doing more. And I would dive into different areas. And this is the first thing that's made so much sense to me. And I am seeing children who use AAC and spoken words. Like I've seen the whole gamut of ones who I'm like, oh, they're a Gestalt language processor, making progress across months that it would have taken us years, if any, to get to. And they're making those neuro connections on their own, which always gives me goosebumps to talk about, because that's how language is. That's how language works when it works naturally, is that you make connections on your own. I don't have to teach you rotely every single thing you are meant to say in every single context. So I am so excited about, I know a lot of people are still digesting that information, and rightfully so. There are skeptics out there that are pushing back, that should push back, because, we need critical eyes. We still need more research about it, specifically with AAC. But I know in my heart of hearts, because it logically makes sense, and I'm seeing success on a regular basis with my AAC users in a natural way. And that brings so much peace to my heart, because these are children who I have seen for so many years get stuck, and they're not stuck anymore. And so kind of undoing the things that we now know better, so we do better, is so important. The last thing that I will say that I think is really important moving forward is, how can we tie multimedia to AAC for the betterment of the user themselves? So much around AAC, we know it takes a longer than spoken words to communicate, right? When we look at how we can use written expression or multimedia, like let's say talking to our Google or our Alexa, or getting on Facebook and sharing a message on social media, or Instagram, how we can use Canva. For those who don't know, Canva is a creative software that is web-based, that if you're an educator, you can get a free Canva account and you can do some amazing things. Lauren Ender's in the field. She has some amazing presentations. Sarah Gregory and her did one a couple years back on it. And it's so versatile. And what I love about it is that it takes the pressure when you do writing, and when you teach, and I mean, we could do a whole topic about literacy and the importance of literacy, but like when you teach writing and you take away the barrier of timing with spoken communication, when we're really just focusing on, what's our message? What do we want to share on social media? Because we know that's powerful. Do we want to create a GIF today? Like, what does that look like? Let's create our own GIF. When you add that engagement so that it's motivating, and when you take away the spoken timing demands, it can be so powerful to get the buy-in for our AAC users. And even when you talk to, younger generations, I just saw something today about how they don't want to make a phone call, right? So, okay, like if that's where we're going, then that's where we're going. Let's lean into that. And so let's do the same thing with our AAC users. Take away the timing component, really focus on how we can engage with multimedia and see what learning comes. Because again, it's about quality. If it takes us a whole 30-minute session to create a GIF because we're typing in different things and or we're like using our core vocabulary to make a sentence and throwing it up on a Google slide, that's great. That's fine. That's perfect for me, because that is authentic, genuine communication that is their own. And so I'm likely to duplicate that. And I'm getting the buy-in, I'm getting all of the things that I would want to see to move forward. So that's where I would love to see the field go more, is take away, we're already doing it in our natural day-to-day. And so lean into it with AAC too. Use multimedia to our advantage. Get creative. Don't feel like you have to have a theme or a unit when you go into a speech session. Just the best things are unlaid plans, right? The best things happen spontaneously. Do you guys, I don't know how long you've been doing AAC, but for the longest time, there was a fart button on all of the dedicated devices.
Yeah.
And so never failed, I would do an assessment, particularly with boys, and they would kind of explore the device, and every single one of them found the fart button. And I was like, we're not talking about farts, but like that's what came up. And so we just leaned into it. So the same things can apply to all of our learners in a session. Just be flexible, be creative, and just go with the flow.
Absolutely. And I think that is very rightly put towards the end of saying that it needs to be effective. It needs to be fast. It needs to be fun. It doesn't need to feel like a chore. I think if we get those components all coming in together, I think we've got our kids on with us, and that's really going to make a difference in terms of communication. So yeah, that brings us to the end. I know there's so much that we would love to talk about, but particularly,
yeah.
I think we can keep going, especially you've got 3 speech therapists here. I know that we can keep going, but I think we just want to take this time, Laura, just to say thank you so much on behalf of PlayStreet for taking the time out and, sharing your knowledge. I know there's so much more that we would love to learn from you, and we believe that this is going to lead us into doing things together, collaborating better to do things together. So we just want to thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us on this very short time. And we just really hope that what you're doing there is going to make an impact. And we know it is making an impact, and it's going to reach out to bigger groups of people. So thank you so much for that. And to all our viewers, we just really hope that all of our audience has gotten a better understanding. We've come a long way. And just like Laura ended it by saying that it needs to be effective, and it's a vital role in empowering, especially individuals with autism, to communicate effectively. And we're trying to address it and trying to bring it down to say that there is no barrier. We can, if we're really into it, we can actually make a big difference. And if we get that mindset shift, we're really being able to give a voice to all of these children, all of these adults, whoever it is who find it so hard, and we're giving them a voice in this world. So we really hope that all of you have enjoyed this session, and we will be back with more. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.